Greetings, everyone. This is Larry Hanson, Chief Marketing Officer for Conference Direct. I want to welcome you to our episode of CD Live. Joining me again today is my partner on hosting CD Live, Adam Briggs, our SVP of Operations at Conference Direct. And we have a great guest today, Greg DeShields, who's Executive Director for Tourism Diversity Matters. And we're going to be talking a little bit about how you can integrate diversity initiatives into your organization. So welcome, Greg, and welcome, Adam.
Great, thank you.
So let's go ahead and get started. So Greg, talk to us first, kind of what are the dimensions of diversity?
So, so often when we talk about diversity, individuals or organizations will focus on the issues of race and ethnicity, when in fact there are about 19 different dimensions of diversity. Obviously, race and ethnicity are part of that, but some of the other more notable ones that might pop up when we talk about the dimensions of diversity, it could be age, it could certainly be the community, whether it's LGBT community, it could be from the able-disabled community, it could certainly be associated with your cultural connection. So looking at all of these different dimensions of diversity are really effective for organizations and individuals to be more accurate in terms of how they are able to target their efforts. Who, in fact, are they talking about? Certainly the conversations can still center upon race and ethnicity, but having enlightenedness and awareness about the dimensions of diversity can allow you to be even that much more effective and that much more targeted to how you engage in conversations around DEI.
Yeah, and Greg, if someone wanted to kind of say, okay, what are those different categories? Is that on Tourism Diversity Matters website that someone can view those?
It is. We do have the dimensions of diversity. There's actually a dimension of diversity wheel. And what's really important as you kind of think through the dimensions of diversity, they can be within your institution, they can be within your network. So there are about 5 different areas of which you approach the lens of what that dimension is. But as any individual or organization pursues a conversation of diversity, equity, and inclusion, it should certainly begin first with having some clarity about, of those 19 different dimensions, which community or which dimension are we having a conversation about or focusing on.
Yeah, that's great. Another area, and I know I've actually had to spend some time understanding this, is the language we use and in regards to diversity. So can you talk to us about what language we should really be using and considering when discussing diversity?
So the first thing I would say about the language of diversity is to kind of start with language in itself. So we use language for the purpose of communication, for us to be able to share ideas, to engage in conversations, and to go a step further is how we can build a relationship and how we build a connection with individuals. So that's the purpose of how we communicate in general. But as we engage in the language of diversity, it's an ability for us to be able to have even that much more of a connection to diverse communities in a much more authentic and effective way. I think it's important to realize that it is not a monolith. It's not one word or one language that really describes any particular community. And let's face it, as the world of diversity, equity, and inclusion evolves, so will the language in itself evolve. So I tend to get the question, is it Black or is it African American? And the reality of it is that there are so many ways of which an individual may feel that those words apply to them. And it can certainly apply in both cases, but not all the time. So to that degree, it is also about asking to feel comfortable with how you communicate in language, and not necessarily feeling as though that you have this responsibility to know all the language, because quite honestly, it does evolve. But as you think through, there's language that certainly relates to, for example, the able-disabled community. Some individuals want to engage in language as it relates to their physical abilities based upon how they identify with that. Like, I am a person who is an amputee, and maybe for them, that's how they want to be identified, and that's the language that they would like to engage. And then there are others who want to be identified as themselves, and they may happen to be an amputee, but that's not how they identify themselves. They might be a scholar, or they might be a husband, they might be a wife. So it's also understanding that that language does not land on just one perspective or one point of view of a person, but realizing that the language really has to engage how that particular person would like to be discussed, or how that particular person would like to engage with you. So,
Greg, do you feel that that is a substantial, I won't use the word roadblock, but challenge when having these conversations, because people get hung up on the language versus the intent or the actual mission or end goals? They just get hung up on both sides of the discussion on the language itself.
So I think the biggest thing when it comes to this issue of language is that we kind of lose what we're ultimately trying to do. We're trying to have a conversation. We're trying to have engagement. We're trying to build a relationship. I mean, that's what we're trying to do. There are words that will help us to be able to do that in a more impactful way. And to that degree, we would love to know that. But in certain cases, especially with the evolution of the language, you may have to ask in order to feel as though that you have that kind of connection with the individual. You know, the pronouns are a perfect example with the LGBT community. You know, the pronouns have really become part of how an individual from that community can be fully engaged in who they are. And to that degree, it now offers you an opportunity to reciprocate with them and engage with them as to how they would like to be identified, and how they would like for you to become even that much more connected with them as an individual. That is an education that individuals will have to pursue. But I think at the end of the day, if it helps you achieve what your initial goal was, which was to build a relationship, to be able to communicate, it takes you in the right direction. But I do think the bigger challenge is we lose sight of what we're trying to do. And if we stay focused on how can I have a better degree of communication and engagement with these individuals, then embracing the idea of learning the language is certainly something that would be in the best interest. But realizing that it doesn't stay stagnant, it certainly may change, and it certainly may evolve as we go forward.
Absolutely. Yeah. Much better way to put it than I asked the question. So thanks for that. You know, obviously there's many people in our industry, in our economy, that are dedicated to DEI for the right reasons, but sometimes justification has to be made to a board, and you know there is a business case that needs to be made for some organizations. So how do you go about engaging in the business case? Do you track an ROI? Like, it's a difficult conversation because it's different motivation for doing DEI, but that's a reality for some people that want to get into this. They have to make that business case. So how do you go about this discovery for that, and helping people through that?
Well, as much as I'm a big advocate on talking about the return on investment for the activities of DEI, and it certainly has been proven that there is a return on investment, I think we always have to start with the conversation that DEI is good for society. It is good for us as people. It is good for our business. But as we begin to peel it back and understand how there's a return on investment, you have to approach DEI like any other business strategy in your organization. How does DEI move our organization to a greater degree of success? Are we considered a premier organization to work, so we're able to attract the best talent that's much more innovative and creative in order for us to function at a high level as an organization? Are we able to expand our market share by having a greater relationship with diverse communities who in fact become customers? But you then, as it's a part of your strategy for success as an organization, define what are the opportunities of growth and business development associated with it, and look at it as a business function, and think of it in terms of, if we are engaged in diversity, equity, and inclusion as a business strategy, that we should invest in it appropriately. We should anticipate that that investment should provide us a return on investment, but we should approach it from a business sense of what is the appropriate amount of investment to ensure its success. How do we establish goals and metrics and evaluation in order to ensure that the efforts that we have put forward and the investments that we have put forward will provide us some sort of outcomes. Now, bear in mind, it may not be a strictly financial increase in your P&L over the course of the first or second quarter. There may just be more of a qualitative environment that you have created. You've reduced turnover. You've created a more positive environment of satisfied employees. But it is about, as you approach looking at the return on investment, understanding the business integration of DEI. It is a part of your strategy. It is one of those top priorities that will lead your organization to success. And to that degree, you apply the same degree of focus around analyzing it, ensuring that it is successful, and evaluate what those actual return on investment metrics or key performance indicators are for your organization, so that as you look forward to what the next evolution of it to be, that you can build upon your previous success.
No, that's great. And I think it's a great segue because, for somebody that's just getting into this and trying to bring their organization into it, it can be very overwhelming. How do you go about getting somebody started in this effort, and what does the plan look like? Do you have key milestones, first quarter, first year, 3-year plan? How does that all work when you're talking to somebody that's trying to implement a DI strategy for the organization?
Well, for most organization, governance or leadership will certainly be those who help to evaluate and determine how it's integrated as a priority to lead to the success of the organization. I would also say that there may be an inability within the current business structure to have a full understanding of how you can engage efforts around DEI. So if it is new to an organization, I think it's important that there is a voice and there is a knowledge expert who can carry you through the subject in a way that you approach it not necessarily from passion, but more from knowledge and expertise in order to approach it successfully. And I want to go back to that point about passion, because listen, we all want to do the right thing. And to that degree, we have a lot of great ideas of what we think would work. Let's have uncomfortable conversations, and let's look at unconscious bias, and let's stop microaggressions. And in some cases, it may not have anything to do with that. It's more the culture of your organization. So as an organization embarks upon a DEI strategy or DEI activity, it's important to know that it is certainly supported and is a priority within the culture of the organization, and then rely on those knowledge experts in that space who can help continue to lead it forward, to have it make successful contributions. So I would say if there's a first starting point, make sure you get a barometer of what the culture is of your organization around this. Determine what are realistic and truly feasible, obtainable goals around DEI. For some, it's just identifying and defining what it actually means to your organization, so there's a consistent understanding as you move forward of what we mean when we say DEI in our particular organization. So that's where I would probably start.
That's great. And just as a follow-up, I think kind of to put words in your mouth, but it's really important, it sounds like, to have an executive sponsor, somebody in a position of authority that can keep this on track, so that it gets the appropriate attention and focus. If I'm
absolutely, there's a lot of organizations where you may have, members of your team who would like to see the work of DEI become a part of their organization. But we love to talk about it from two different perspectives. There is, without any doubt, a clear understanding that it's everyone's responsibility. But when you think in terms of it, there's two questions that you have to really answer. So the first is, why do we do it? And that's usually set by the tone of leadership and governance. They're the ones who have really established a climate and an environment and can help create a clear understanding of why DEI is important to their organization. They have to live and be positive and be persistent and present in all cases of how they discuss it. But the how is the team, how your team become very much committed and understand exactly what the organization is doing It allows for them to do some of their self-assessment to know what kind of internal work they need to do in order to be a contributor to the success of DEI within their organization. So it's having that balance of the why and the how so that everybody has responsibility to engage with it. But it's something that as organizations embark upon it, that it's not about fixing it. This is a long-term strategy. It's a part of the DNA of the organization. And what you do in 2022 is certainly going to be different from what you do in 2025, and realizing that it's ever evolving. And to that degree, if you're able to begin your journey with a successful first step, then you have a lot of opportunity to build upon it as you go forward.
And Greg, that's great kind of strategy to get started. But if we're looking at kind of like what is an outreach strategy for DEI, what does that look like?
So an outreach strategy for DEI has a lot to do with you first understanding who you want to reach out to. And I say that because for some organizations, it might be about building a best practice of how we do outreach. When we look at the 19 different dimensions of diversity, for example, you certainly want to be effective and authentic in terms of how you make outreach and communication with communities, but you have to kind of build the ability to know how we do that successfully and, more importantly, authentically. How are we considered to be a genuine ally, or how are we considered to have a full cultural competency within our organization? So I would say that outreach has a lot to do with first understanding, like, what are the communities, who are the communities that we'd like to reach out to? How do we want to reach out to them? Do we want to be a sponsor to support their community? Do we want to find a way to engage in how we can be an advocate and support some of the initiatives that are really important to those communities? But if you can build a successful strategy of how you effectively do outreach, which can support and build those communities while also adding value to your organization and your organization's commitment to diversity and inclusion, you build what would be a best practice for you and how you can expand upon that and reach out to multiple different communities.
Great. Well, DEI is obviously a journey. We're very focused at Conference Direct, but at your point of what it looks like today, your journey as compared to 3 years is a very relative point, and we're seeing that. But we really appreciate you taking the time today, Greg, to kind of talk about DEI and how you can build upon that. So thank you again for being our speaker today. And Adam, thank you very much for being the co-host.
And, thank you. And thank you, Greg. And for anyone else that's watching this that wants to learn more, Greg, what's the best way for them to reach out?
Well, you can Google us at Tourism Diversity Matters, and we'll pop up with a variety of resources. And I will certainly say that as an organization, our intent is to be the DEI resource for the tourism and hospitality industry, providing a lot of best practices, knowledge, insights about how we can move DEI in our organization.
Great. And just a reminder to everyone, you can see all of our CD Live on our Conference Direct YouTube channel or on our website at conferencedirect.com. So thank you again for joining us. And thank you, Greg and Adam.
Thank you.